The Human-Forerunner War was, in essence, a tragic miscommunication. Humanity's expansion and the subsequent destruction of Forerunner and other species' planets were not the marauding conquest they appeared to be, but desperate attempts to combat the monstrous threat of the Flood. While humans viewed their actions as necessary, the Forerunners saw only reckless, quick aggression and expansion. Forthenko, the Lord of Admirals, would give orders to sterilize infected planets, even Forerunner ones, and it had to be done as quickly as possible, without pause to contact their alien neighbors.
My lord, the infestation is in a remote locale. Perhaps if we warn the Forerunners?
If we warn them, we give the Flood time to spread. You know we have no choice.
Without the context of the Flood's potency, the Forerunners failed to see the preventative intent behind the seemingly merciless orbital bombardments. The Forerunners would respond, and the humans would quickly lose Erda, humanity's homeworld. And despite their relentless efforts, humanity remained distant from the Orion complex, which was the heart of Forerunner power. They were continually outmaneuvered by the astute military strategies of the Forerunners. The Didact masterminded the efficient star-hopping plan, which aimed to destabilize the human strategic strongholds, while leaving the less consequential systems untouched. All of these strategic moves and counter-moves occurred under the ever-looming, ever-expanding shadow of the Flood, an existential threat that neither side was fully prepared to confront. 40 years before the end of the war, human researchers would discover a being known as the Primordial. This mysterious creature was an evolved form of a precursor, which underwent significant mutations that enabled its survival all this time. Such was its transformation that its present form bore little resemblance to the precursors during the era of the Forerunners' assault on them. Some contemporaries speculated that it might be an engineered entity, potentially a precursor to what would later become known as the Gravemind, constructed from an amalgamation of different beings. Forthenko estimated this number to be around 12, though no precise count was ever established. Around 9 million BCE, a millennium after the Forerunners vanquished the precursors, the Primordial was discovered in a state of hibernation within an asteroid in the galaxy's outskirts. The Gravemind indicated that it was during this period that the Primordial found its way to this remote locale. The identity of those who chose to imprison it remains unclear, but it seems to point toward the involvement of the earlier Forerunners. Intriguingly, even in its dormant state, Forthenko proposed that the Primordial might have played a role in initiating the voyage of the ships that eventually ushered the Flood into the galaxy, perhaps by communicating as the precursors could in more than just our 4 dimensions. Realizing how potentially dangerous this being could be, it was placed in a time lock, a stasis field that warped space-time in a way to create a bubble in which time stood still. As the human and Sanshayum researchers continued to probe the mind of the Primordial, they received cryptic answers to the questions about the origins of life in the Milky Way, and the being became something of an oracle locked deep beneath the surface of Cherim Hakor. When the questions turned to the Flood, its origins and goals, the answers they received drove many to take their own lives. In their most desperate hour, faced with the relentless advance of the Flood, humanity's leaders made a heart-wrenching decision. They modified the genetics of a third of their populace and then exposed them to the ravages of the Flood. The hope was that the new genetic makeup would act as a weapon against the Flood's spread. To some, it seemed this gamble had paid off as the Flood began to dwindle and ultimately vanished from sight, not to resurface for another 9,000 years. Yet this victory was a trick. The Flood had not been truly defeated, and humanity's genetic experiments hadn't been the panacea they hoped for. The Flood's withdrawal was a conscious choice, the reasons for which would remain a mystery for many millennia. The war itself left indelible scars on humanity, numerous human worlds were obliterated, and the death toll rose staggeringly, with over a third of all humans lost. Humans had to contend with not just the Flood, but the formidable Forerunners as well, and humanity would prove to be surprisingly resilient, though the impact of the Flood War had weakened humanity's overall position. As the Flood menace retreated, humanity sought to marshal its forces against the looming Forerunner threat, but it simply was too late. The Didact capitalized on humanity's vulnerabilities. Even though human armies could hold their own against the Forerunners, they were spread too thin and exhausted, ultimately falling prey to the Didact's strategic might. As the Flood's dominance began to wane, they never truly disappeared, and they still clutched to a vast number of worlds at the galaxy's edge. It was during this phase that the Forerunners' warrior servants, led by the Didact, first encountered the monstrous parasite. Many other battle fleets fell prey to the Flood's insidious infection, but once they grasped the sheer magnitude and nature of the menace, the Forerunners pivoted to a relentless strategy of obliteration. Leveraging their vast firepower, they succeeded in quelling the Flood spread, yet their victory was not without lessons. From the remnants of the Flood they captured, they uncovered the chilling reality of the Flood's logic plague. This formidable weapon of the Flood had managed to corrupt their ancillas, their onboard AIs, that were within the infested Forerunner fleets. While in the background, humanity was undergoing a silent renaissance. On the verge of the climactic battles, they had made leaps in both military and scientific domains. Many attribute this to Y'Pren Y'Perkushma, humanity's political and morale commander, building upon knowledge from their earlier skirmishes with the Forerunners. While the humans had ingeniously repurposed precursor star roads to bolster their orbital defenses, the Forerunners' superior strategic maneuvers began to show. Regardless of the knowledge humanity had amassed from prior clashes, they found themselves retreating and their supply lines severed. The Forerunners targeted humanity's slipspace tunnels. This move choked off the reinforcements and isolated the Cherim-Hakor system from the broader alliance between humans and the Sanshayum. Yet, in the face of adversity, one figure stood tall, unwavering against the relentless Forerunner onslaught, Lord of Admirals Forthenko. Leading the defense of Cherim-Hakor, the last bastion of humanity, Forthenko orchestrated a fierce resistance against the Didact for 3 more years. This was despite having a numerically inferior fleet, technologically outdated slipstream capabilities, and archaic AI technology. The human armada under its command darted across the system, countering the Didact's audacious maneuvers in orbit and preventing the establishment of key forward bases by Forerunner forces. As the siege wore on, the Forerunners reached out covertly to the Sanshayum. They proposed a devil's bargain, betray the humans and grant the Forerunners a breach in Cherim-Hakor's defenses. And in return, the Sanshayum would be spared the horrors of extinction and forced de-evolution. Instead, they'd face a more merciful fate, simply quarantine within their native system. The weight of survival bore heavily on the Sanshayum, and they found themselves at an impossible moral crossroads. While the Didact's tactics grew ever more intense and calculated, their final strategy saw a series of portal openings meticulously timed, releasing wave after wave of Forerunner might. And these weren't just any ships. From the massive Fortress-class warships to the nimble picket cruisers, each played its role in cracking the formidable human defenses. The Forerunner strategy was simple, yet brutally effective, to use sheer force to finally overwhelm and end this siege. With countless vessels destroyed in their aggressive charges, but they deemed the sacrifice necessary, as humanity could feel the galaxy descending on them in their last stand on Cherim-Hakor. Desperation led to the contemplation of unthinkable strategies. Among the debated ideas was the proposal to unleash the Flood against the Forerunners, hoping their terror might buy humanity some time, but the risks, and the potential for galaxy-wide catastrophe, would see them not carry this plan out. Though the treachery of the Sanshayum was the final nail in the coffin. Without their betrayal, the unique defenses of Cherim-Hakor might have prolonged the standoff indefinitely. In these dire times, humanity sought to protect its most significant assets. One such mission involved a substantial task force, 7,000 strong, with a smaller auxiliary fleet of 70 ships. Their objective was singular, to guard the time lock of the Primordial within the Cherim-Hakor arena. The group was led by Y'Pren, and as the end loomed, many of these brave warriors shed their uniforms, hoping to confound the Forerunners and protect their leaders. But the Didact, ever perceptive, had no difficulty spotting his main enemy, the Lord of Admirals, among the remnants of humanity gathered in the Citadel Cherim. In the wake of the catastrophic defeat, humanity was at the lowest point in its history, and knew the fate that awaited them, of forced relocation and technological regression. Many sadly would choose the ultimate escape, ending their own lives before falling into the hands of the Forerunners. And the Didact would establish massive monuments to his Forerunner warriors in this system.